I'm Morgan Taylor, 34, driving home through Seattle's worst downpour in years. The windshield wipers barely kept up as I squinted through the torrent. That's when I saw her, a solitary figure at the bus stop, completely drenched, clutching herself against the cold. I never pick up strangers, but something about her desperate stance made me pull over. After a moment's hesitation, she slid into my passenger seat, rain cascading from her clothes. I had no idea this simple act of kindness would completely transform both our lives. Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had a chance encounter that unexpectedly changed everything. The woman sat rigid in my passenger seat, her soaked clothes creating a small puddle on the floor mat. Up close, I could see she was younger than I initially thought, mid-20s perhaps, with dark blonde hair plastered to her face by the rain. Her knuckles were white from gripping a worn messenger bag on her lap. The car filled with an uncomfortable silence broken only by the rhythmic swish of wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I didn't think anyone would stop." "I couldn't just leave you out there," I replied, keeping my eyes on the slick road. "I'm Morgan, by the way." She hesitated before answering. "Amber. Amber Hayes." "Where are you headed, Amber?" I asked, adjusting the heater to full blast. She was shivering. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "North Seattle, if that's not too far. There's a shelter on 45th Street. I nodded, trying not to show my surprise. She didn't look like what I'd expected from someone seeking shelter, though I immediately felt ashamed at my own prejudice. Who was I to judge what homelessness looked like? "I can take you there, no problem," I assured her. "It's not that far from my place." Rain pounded harder against the windshield as we drove in silence for several blocks. I could feel her discomfort, the tension of being in a stranger's car. To ease the awkwardness, I started talking about myself. "I manage an art gallery downtown," I offered. "Small place, but we showcase some amazing local artists." I glanced over to see if she was listening. "Been doing it for about 5 years now, ever since my divorce." I hadn't meant to mention the divorce, but something about the anonymous intimacy of the car and the rain made it slip out. Amber turned slightly toward me, her expression softening. "What kind of art?" she asked quietly. "All kinds. Photography, paintings, mixed media. Whatever speaks to me." I smiled, grateful for the response. "What about you? What do you do?" Her shoulders tensed again. I'm between jobs right now." The traffic light ahead turned red, and I stopped, using the moment to really look at her. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something striking about Amber, an intelligence in her hazel eyes, a determined set to her jaw. Her clothes, though wet and somewhat worn, were of good quality. I wondered what her story was but didn't want to pry. As we continued through the rainy streets, the glow of restaurant signs reflected in puddles along the roadside. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since lunch. A thought occurred to me. "Have you had dinner?" I asked impulsively. "I'm starving, and there's a great little diner just ahead." "My treat." Amber looked startled by the offer. "I couldn't, you've already gone out of your way." "It's no trouble," I insisted. "Actually, I'd appreciate the company." That part was true. Since my divorce from David 3 years ago, most of my evenings had been solitary affairs. She seemed to wage an internal debate, glancing at her watch before finally nodding. "If you're sure it's no imposition." I pulled into the parking lot of the Rainy Day Cafe, an appropriately named retro diner that had been a Seattle fixture for decades. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered against the dark sky, and the windows were fogged with condensation from the warmth inside. "They make the best comfort food in the city," I told her as we dashed through the rain to the entrance. "And tonight seems like a night that calls for comfort food." The bell above the door jingled as we entered the cozy diner. The aroma of coffee and fried food enveloped us as a waitress named Doris, who'd worked there as long as I'd been coming, waved us to a booth by the window. Amber slid in, still clutching her bag close, her eyes darting around as if assessing escape routes. "Their meatloaf is legendary," I suggested as we studied the laminated menus. "Or the mac and cheese if you're vegetarian." "The mac and cheese sounds good," she said, placing the menu down carefully. "Thank you again, Morgan. This is unexpected." I shrugged. "Sometimes the best things are." Doris brought us steaming mugs of coffee, and Amber wrapped her cold hands around hers gratefully. As she warmed up, both physically and to my presence, I noticed her posture relaxing incrementally. "So you work at an art gallery," she said after taking a sip. "That sounds fascinating." "It is, most days," I admitted. "Though sometimes it's just like any other job, paperwork, difficult clients, temperamental artists." I smiled. "But then I'll find a new artist whose work just moves me, and I remember why I love it." Amber nodded, a flash of something, recognition, perhaps, crossing her face. "Art has that power," she said softly. "To remind us why life is worth the struggle." There was such conviction in her voice that I found myself curious again. "Do you have a background in art?" She looked down at her coffee. "Not formally. I never finished college. But I've always loved photography." A slight smile touched her lips. "Even when I couldn't afford proper equipment, I was always taking pictures with whatever camera I could get my hands on." Our food arrived, steaming plates of creamy mac and cheese for Amber and meatloaf for me. I watched as she took her first bite, closing her eyes briefly in appreciation. "Good, right?" I asked. She nodded. "It's been a while since I've had a hot meal like this." The admission hung in the air between us. I wanted to ask more but was afraid of scaring her off. Instead, I shared more about myself, my childhood in Portland, my move to Seattle for college, meeting David in art history class, our 8-year marriage and its eventual dissolution. "He wasn't a bad guy," I found myself explaining. "We just wanted different things. He was climbing the corporate ladder, and I was more interested in the arts. Eventually, we became strangers living in the same house." Amber listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that suggested she genuinely cared about my answers. As she grew more comfortable, she offered small details about herself in return. She'd grown up in a small town outside Spokane. She had a younger sister named Katie whom she adored. She'd moved to Seattle 3 years ago for a fresh start. "And the photography?" I prompted. "Did you pursue that professionally?" A shadow crossed her face. I tried. "I had a job as an assistant at a studio until recently. I was learning a lot, but," she trailed off, pushing a piece of pasta around her plate. "But things happened," I finished for her. She nodded, looking up at me with a mixture of wariness and relief, as if glad I wasn't pushing for details but also surprised I seemed to understand. "Things always happen," I agreed. "The question is whether we let them define us or whether we define ourselves." "That's profound," she said with a small smile. "You sound like my journal." "You keep a journal?" "It helps me process things," she explained. "Part diary, part portfolio. I paste in photos, write about what I see, what I feel. It keeps me sane." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows. I noticed Amber glancing anxiously at her watch again. "The shelter has a curfew," she explained. "I should probably get going soon." I paid the bill despite her protests and we hurried back to my car. The streets were even more flooded now, and I drove carefully through the standing water. As we neared North Seattle, Amber directed me to stop at a corner several blocks from the shelter. "I can drop you closer," I offered, concerned about her walking in the downpour. "This is perfect," she insisted. I prefer to approach from this direction." Something in her tone made me not question further. I pulled over, and she gathered her bag. "Thank you for everything, Morgan," she said, genuine gratitude in her eyes. "The ride, the meal, the conversation. It meant more than you know." It was my pleasure, I replied, surprised to find I truly meant it. Take care of yourself, Amber. She nodded, then ducked out into the rain, pulling her jacket over her head. I watched as she hurried down the sidewalk, her figure growing smaller until she turned a corner and disappeared from view. With a sigh, I pulled away from the curb, heading home through the stormy night. The rainy day cafe was exactly what we both needed that night, a haven from the storm outside. The diner's vintage decor, with its chrome-edged tables and red vinyl booths, offered a nostalgic comfort that seemed to envelop us as soon as we stepped inside. The windows had fogged up from the contrast between the cold rain and the warmth within, creating a cozy isolation from the world outside. After Dora seated us and took our orders, I noticed Amber's shoulders gradually relaxing. The fluorescent lights reflected off the raindrops still clinging to her hair, making them sparkle like tiny diamonds. She kept her bag on her lap, one hand always maintaining contact with it, as if afraid it might disappear. So, you were saying you worked as a photography assistant? I prompted, hoping to learn more about her. Amber nodded, warming her hands around her coffee mug. At Harper Studios. Small place, specialized in product photography mostly, but Jim, the owner, was teaching me a lot about portrait work too. A wistful expression crossed her face. I was saving up for a decent DSLR camera. What happened with the job? I asked gently. Her expression clouded. I had to leave suddenly. It's complicated. I recognized the look of someone with wounds too fresh to discuss with a stranger. I'd worn it myself after my divorce. I understand complicated, I assured her. Sometimes life throws curveballs that nobody else can quite understand unless they've been there. She looked up at me with surprising intensity. Exactly. Everyone has advice, but unless they've walked in your shoes. She trailed off, then took a deep breath. Anyway, I'm trying to rebuild. It's just taking longer than I expected. Our food arrived, steaming and aromatic. I watched as Amber took her first bite of mac and cheese, closing her eyes briefly in appreciation. This is amazing, she said after swallowing. Thank you again for this. My pleasure, I replied, cutting into my meatloaf. So what kind of photography do you love most? This question animated her. For the first time, I saw genuine enthusiasm light up her face. Street photography, she answered without hesitation. Capturing authentic moments, real emotion, life as it happens. There's something powerful about freezing a genuine human moment in time. She gestured with her fork. Gallery photography is beautiful, but sometimes it feels too constructed. I love the rawness of street scenes. We actually featured a street photographer last month, I told her. Guy named Marcus Williams. His work captures Seattle's homeless population with incredible dignity. I know his work. Amber's eyes widened. His series on the tent cities under the freeway was breathtaking. You featured him? I nodded, pleased by her reaction. I convinced the owner to take a chance on him. The exhibition was controversial but successful. We sold almost every piece. That's incredible, she said, looking at me with new respect. Most galleries won't touch social commentary work like that. Art should provoke thought and emotion, I said, surprised by my own vehemence. Otherwise, what's the point? It becomes just decoration. Amber nodded emphatically. That's why I started photographing the people at the shelter. Their stories deserve to be seen, to be acknowledged. You're documenting life at the shelter? She seemed to realize she'd revealed more than intended. Just personal projects. Nothing formal. As we continued eating, the conversation flowed more naturally. Amber asked intelligent questions about the art world, and I found myself explaining the business side of running a gallery, the delicate balance of artistic integrity and commercial viability. It sounds like you're good at what you do, she observed. I shrugged. I try to be. After my divorce, the gallery became my life. Maybe too much so. I surprised myself with the admission. David, my ex, used to say I cared more about other people's art than our marriage. He might have been right. Or maybe he didn't understand your passion, Amber suggested. Some people never do. There was something in her tone that suggested personal experience. I ventured a careful question. Is that what happened with you? Someone didn't understand your passion? Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. After a moment, she set it down. Jake, my ex-boyfriend, hated my photography. Said it was a waste of time and money. Her voice had become flat, emotionless in a way that suggested the opposite, too much emotion, carefully controlled. He wanted me focused on him. Just him. That sounds restrictive, I said carefully. It was. Two simple words that seemed to contain volumes. Outside, lightning flashed, followed by a rumble of thunder. Amber jumped slightly at the sound. Sorry, she said with an embarrassed smile. I've been a little on edge lately. No need to apologize, I assured her. Thunder makes everyone jumpy. We finished our meals, and I ordered us each a slice of the diner's famous apple pie. As we waited, Amber glanced at her watch again. The shelter has strict check-in times, she explained, noticing my observation. Missed the cutoff, and you're sleeping in a doorway. That sounds rough, I said. How long have you been staying there? She hesitated before answering. 3 weeks this time. I was renting a room before that, but it fell through. Another pause. The shelters aren't as bad as people think. Most of them, anyway. This one has decent security, which is important for women alone. The way she emphasized security made me wonder what she was afraid of, beyond the general vulnerability of homelessness. Our pie arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. I told her about some of the eccentric artists I'd worked with, and she shared stories about unusual photography subjects she'd encountered. We laughed together, the earlier tension dissipating. As we prepared to leave, the rain still hammering against the windows, Amber grew serious again. Morgan, she said, meeting my eyes directly. Thank you for treating me like a person tonight. Not a charity case or a problem to be solved. Just, a person having dinner with another person. That doesn't happen much these days. Her words caught me off guard with their sincerity. You are a person, I said simply. A person who got caught in the rain and had dinner with me. Nothing more complicated than that. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Nothing more complicated than that, she repeated, though we both knew it wasn't true. Life was always more complicated. As we drove back into the stormy night, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge, I noticed Amber growing tenser the closer we got to North Seattle. She directed me to stop several blocks from the actual shelter address. I can take you all the way, I offered. No, this is perfect, she insisted. I need to. I prefer to approach from this direction. Something in her voice made me not push the issue. As she gathered her belongings, she turned to me one last time. Thank you again, Morgan. For everything. Then she was gone, disappearing into the rainy darkness, leaving behind only the lingering scent of diner coffee and the impression of someone carrying a much heavier burden than a worn messenger bag. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle by the time I pulled into my apartment complex. The parking lot gleamed under the streetlights, puddles reflecting the yellow glow like miniature moons. I sat in my car for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, thinking about Amber and wondering if she'd made it to the shelter before lockout. My apartment greeted me with familiar emptiness, clean but unlived in, like a hotel room. After my divorce, I'd moved to this smaller place but never really made it mine. No photos on the walls, minimal furniture, nothing personal except books and a few art pieces from the gallery. David had called it museum-like during one of his rare visits, and not as a compliment. I kicked off my wet shoes and hung my damp coat in the bathroom to dry. The encounter with Amber had left me feeling strangely unsettled, as if I'd glimpsed a world running parallel to mine that I'd been oblivious to before. I made myself a cup of tea and curled up on the couch, rain pattering against the windows. It was only when I set my mug down on the coffee table that I noticed my keys weren't there. With a sigh, I realized I must have left them in the car. Slipping my feet into a pair of rubber flip-flops, I trudged back to the parking lot. The keys were in the ignition, just as I'd suspected. As I reached over to grab them, something caught my eye, a small object wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. I pulled it free and found myself holding a small, weathered leather journal, its edges soft from frequent handling. Amber's journal. My first thought was that I needed to return it. I checked the time, nearly midnight. Too late to head back to the shelter now, even if I knew exactly which one she was staying at. I'd have to wait until morning. I took the journal inside with me, placing it on the kitchen counter while I made a fresh cup of tea. The right thing would be to set it aside until I could return it, but my eyes kept drifting to it. What if there was contact information inside that would help me return it more easily? That justification was all it took. I carefully opened the front cover, telling myself I would only look for contact details. The first page contained just a name and date, Amber Hayes, January 2024. Only 8 months ago. The next page held a neatly taped photograph of a sunset over what looked like Puget Sound, the colors vivid despite being captured on what appeared to be a basic smartphone camera. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, "Remember, there are still beautiful things in the world." I turned the page, feeling increasingly like an intruder but unable to stop. Another photo, this one of a young girl with Amber's same hazel eyes, perhaps 12 years old, laughing at the camera. Katie's first day of middle school, the caption read. So proud of her. The pages that followed contained more photographs, ordinary scenes transformed by Amber's eye for composition and light. A homeless man's weathered hands cradling a cup of coffee. A dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight. Raindrops on a spider's web. Each image was accompanied by brief, thoughtful observations that revealed Amber's unique perspective. I was struck by her talent. These weren't just snapshots, they were art. With proper equipment and training, Amber could be extraordinary. As I continued through the journal, the tone began to shift. The entries from February became shorter, tenser. Jake followed me to work again today. Jim noticed and asked questions. I made excuses. Jake surprised me by going through my phone while I was showering. Said he was making sure I wasn't cheating. When I objected, he threw my phone against the wall. I can't afford to replace it. The next page contained no photo, just a hurried entry, "He hit me tonight." Said it was my fault for provoking him. Maybe it was. I don't know anymore. My stomach tightened. The beautiful journal had taken a dark turn, documenting a relationship's descent into abuse. I wanted to stop reading but couldn't tear myself away, feeling like I needed to bear witness to Amber's story. March entries documented escalating control and violence. Then, in early April, a moment of clarity: this isn't love. This is prison. I need to leave before it's too late. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later, the handwriting shaky: "We're safe. Katie and I got out while Jake was at work. We're staying with Melissa for now. He's been calling nonstop, alternating between threats and apologies. I changed my number. Started looking for a new job. Can't go back to Harper Studios, it's the first place he'll look." I found myself holding my breath as I read, relieved they had escaped but anxious about what came next. The following pages documented Amber's attempts to rebuild. Job applications, apartment searches, all while looking over her shoulder. A May entry: Katie had a nightmare about Jake finding us. I held her until she fell back asleep. I promised I'd keep her safe. I have to keep that promise. A photograph showed Katie sleeping, her face peaceful despite the circumstances. The love in that image was palpable. June brought setbacks, lost the room at Melissa's. Her boyfriend doesn't want the drama of my situation. Can't blame him. Jake somehow found her address, kept driving by. We're at the women's shelter now. Katie says it's like camping. Trying to make this an adventure for her instead of a nightmare. Then, a glimmer of hope in July, got a lead on a photography assistant position at Meridian magazine. The portfolio I salvaged isn't my best work, but it might be enough to get my foot in the door. Interview next week. I glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. I'd been reading for hours, completely absorbed in Amber's journey. The most recent entries were from just last week. Jake found someone at the shelter who told him where we're staying. Had to move again. The North Seattle shelter has better security, but it's further from Katie's school. The commute is worth it for peace of mind. And then, the final entry, dated that very morning, saw Jake's car outside the convenience store near the shelter. He didn't see me. I ducked into an alley and waited until he left. He's getting closer. We need to move again. The interview at Meridian is tomorrow morning. Everything depends on it. I need this job. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Amber hadn't just left a journal in my car, she'd left her entire life story, her evidence, her art. And based on that last entry, she was in immediate danger from Jake. I had to find her. Not just to return the journal, but to make sure she and Katie were safe. I checked the time again. Too late to do anything tonight, but first thing tomorrow, I would start searching. The journal mentioned an interview at Meridian magazine, that was a concrete lead. I placed the journal carefully on my nightstand and tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with images from Amber's photographs and the haunting words from her entries. Morning couldn't come soon enough. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of Amber and Katie, their faces, one known, one only seen in photographs, floating in and out of my consciousness. By 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and made a strong pot of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with Amber's journal open before me, reading it more thoroughly now. The journal revealed layers to Amber that our brief encounter hadn't. Beyond the abuse narrative, I discovered a woman of remarkable resilience and talent. Between the darker entries were moments of beauty she'd captured even in the midst of her struggles. A bird's nest outside a shelter window, Katie doing homework under the glow of a library lamp, an elderly woman at the shelter teaching Katie how to knit. What struck me most was Amber's eye for composition and light. Using only a basic smartphone camera, she'd created images that professional photographers with expensive equipment would envy. Her natural talent shone through the limitations of her tools. As the sun rose, I focused on the more recent entries, looking for clues about Amber's current situation. The journal detailed her meticulous preparation for the Meridian magazine interview. Practiced answers to potential questions with Katie. She played the interviewer while wearing my sunglasses and a pretend blazer made from her sweater. Made us both laugh, which we needed. Organized my portfolio, wish I had my best work, but Jake destroyed so much when he trashed the apartment. The backup portfolio will have to do. Another entry mentioned Katie's school. Enrolled Katie at Greenwood Elementary. The counselor was understanding about our situation. They have a good security protocol, which helps me breathe easier when we're apart. I made note of these locations, Meridian Magazine and Greenwood Elementary. They would be my starting points. The journal also contained scattered photographs documenting Amber's injuries after Jake's attacks, bruises on her arms, a split lip, a black eye, along with dates and brief descriptions. She'd been creating evidence, I realized. Protecting herself legally even while in survival mode. One of the final entries gave me pause. Katie asked today when we could go home. I had to explain that home isn't a place right now, it's wherever we're together and safe. She's too young to understand why we can't just find a new apartment. Can't explain that without a steady job, no landlord will rent to us, and the shelters are our only option until I can save enough for a security deposit. She just wants her own bed back, her books, her stuffed animals. All the things Jake destroyed or we had to leave behind. The rawness of that entry brought tears to my eyes. I understood Katie's longing for stability. After my divorce, I'd felt unmoored for months, even with all the privileges of financial security and a support system. What hit me hardest was an entry from just 2 weeks ago. Sometimes I feel so alone in this. The shelter staff try, but they're overworked and underfunded. Other women here have their own traumas. Katie is the only thing keeping me going some days. I look at her and think, she deserves better than this. SHE is why I can't give up. The final pages contained logistics, addresses of food banks, free clinic hours, the schedule for Katie's school, job application status notes. Amber's entire precarious existence documented in neat, determined handwriting. The last page held a sketch of a dream apartment. Simple, modest, with notes in the margins about realistic rent budgets and neighborhoods that might be safe from Jake. Below it, written in bold letters, someday soon. I closed the journal gently, feeling the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about returning a lost item anymore. This journal contained Amber's survival strategy, her evidence against Jake, her artistic portfolio, and her dreams for the future. Without it, she was more vulnerable than ever. And according to her final entry, Jake was closing in. I showered and dressed quickly, my mind formulating a plan. Meridian magazine would be my first stop. The interview was supposed to be this morning. If I hurried, I might catch her there. As I gathered my things, I paused to look at the journal one more time. A loose photograph had fallen out, Amber and Katie together, their cheeks pressed together, smiling despite everything. On the back, in Katie's childish handwriting, me and Mom being brave. My resolve strengthened. I had to find them today. I arrived at Meridian Magazine's downtown office just before 9 a.m. The modern glass building reflected the morning light, making it shine like a beacon against the gray Seattle sky. The rain had finally stopped, but puddles still dotted the sidewalks, and the air felt clean and washed. The receptionist, a young man with horn-rimmed glasses and an expression of practiced boredom, looked up as I approached the desk. "I'm looking for Amber Hayes," I said, trying to sound casual. "She had an interview here this morning." He consulted his computer. "Hayes, yes, she was scheduled for 8:30 with our photo editor. The interview ended about 15 minutes ago." My heart sank. "Do you know if she's still in the building?" "She left right after. Didn't say where she was going." He eyed me curiously. "Are you a friend of hers?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I have something important to return to her, but I don't have her current contact information." He shrugged. "Sorry, can't help you there. Privacy policy." I thanked him and turned to leave, disappointed but not surprised. As I waited for the elevator, I overheard two women in conversation nearby. "Definitely the most impressive portfolio we've seen for the junior position," one was saying. "Especially considering she shot most of those on a smartphone. Imagine what she could do with proper equipment." "Did you see her reaction when Lisa mentioned the staff camera package?" "I thought she might cry," the other replied. Though she seemed nervous about something. Kept checking her watch. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in alongside them, trying not to look too interested in their conversation. "Well, Lisa was impressed enough to expedite the decision," the first woman continued. "Said she's calling her with an offer this afternoon instead of next week." My spirits lifted. Amber had done well in the interview. If she got the job, it could be her first step toward stability. But I still needed to find her and return the journal before her interview with Lisa. Outside the building, I pulled out my phone and searched for Greenwood Elementary. According to the journal, Katie was enrolled there, and Amber would likely pick her up after school. The question was, when did school end? A quick search told me dismissal was at 3:15 p.m. I had hours to kill, but at least I had a solid lead. In the meantime, I decided to check the North Seattle shelter mentioned in the journal. The shelter was housed in a former church, its brick facade softened by planters of cheerful yellow flowers. A hand-painted sign read Harbor House Women's Shelter. I approached the front desk, where a tired-looking middle-aged woman was sorting through paperwork. "I'm looking for Amber Hayes," I explained. "She might be staying here with her daughter Katie." The woman's expression immediately turned guarded. "We don't confirm who stays with us," she said firmly. "For the safety of our residents." I understand, I assured her. I'm not trying to intrude. Amber left something important in my car last night, and I'm trying to return it to her. The woman studied my face, assessing my intentions. You can leave it here, and if, hypothetically, someone by that name were staying with us, we could pass it along. I hesitated, clutching my purse where I'd stored the journal. It's very personal and valuable to her. I'd really prefer to give it to her directly. I'm sure you would, she replied, unmoved. But that's not how we operate. The women who come here often have safety concerns. Like being followed by abusive ex-boyfriends? I asked quietly. Her eyes narrowed. What do you know about that? I took a chance. I know Amber and Katie are hiding from someone named Jake. I know they've moved several times because he keeps finding them. I'm worried about them. The woman sighed, her expression softening slightly. Look, even if I knew who you were talking about, which I'm not confirming, I couldn't help you. But, she hesitated, then continued, hypothetically, if there was a resident concerned about being found, and that resident didn't check in last night, we would be concerned too. My stomach tightened. She didn't come back last night? The woman gave me a measured look. I didn't say that. But I will say that we have strict curfew policies unless arrangements are made in advance. Thank you, I said, understanding what she wasn't saying. One more question, if someone wanted to find a resident here, how might they go about it? We've had incidents, she admitted reluctantly. Sometimes all it takes is someone claiming to be a concerned family member. Or in one case, a man got information by befriending residents at the bus stop outside. She gestured toward the window. We've increased security since then, but... I nodded, understanding. Jake could have used similar tactics to track Amber's movements. With several hours still to kill before school dismissal, I decided to visit places mentioned in Amber's journal. I found the library where she'd taken Katie to study, the community center where they'd attended free art classes, and the cafe where Amber had written about applying for jobs using their free Wi-Fi. At each stop, I showed Amber's photo from my phone, a discreet snapshot I'd taken at the diner when she was looking out the window. Several people recognized her. Oh yes, the young mother with the camera, said a librarian at the Greenwood branch. She helps her daughter with homework every Tuesday and Thursday. Very quiet, but always polite. Amber? She volunteers here sometimes, shared a staff member at the community center. Teaches basic photography to the kids when she can. They adore her. Haven't seen her this week, though. She and her daughter come in on weekends, confirmed a barista at the North End Cafe. The little girl always gets hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Sweet kid. With each conversation, a fuller picture of Amber emerged, a devoted mother, a skilled photographer, a woman struggling but still finding ways to contribute to her community. I felt increasingly invested in finding her, not just to return the journal but to make sure she and Katie were safe. Finally, it was time to head to Greenwood Elementary. I arrived 20 minutes before dismissal and parked across the street, watching parents begin to gather near the entrance. My heart pounded with anticipation and nervousness. What would I say to Amber when I found her? Would she be angry that I'd read her journal? At 3:15 p.m., children began streaming out of the building. I scanned the crowd anxiously, looking for Katie's face from the photographs. After several minutes of searching, I spotted her. A slight figure with a purple backpack, her hair in the same braids as in the journal photos. And next to her, looking tired but alert, was Amber. Relief washed over me. They were safe. I got out of my car and crossed the street, waving to catch Amber's attention. When she saw me, her expression cycled rapidly from confusion to recognition to alarm. Morgan, she said as I approached. What are you doing here? You left something in my car, I explained, reaching into my purse. Your journal. I've been trying to find you all day. Amber's face paled. My journal? Her hand went automatically to her bag, as if to verify it was truly missing. I've been tearing everything apart looking for it. I thought I'd lost it at the shelter war. Mom, who's this? Katie interrupted, looking up at me with curious eyes. This is Morgan, Amber explained, placing a protective hand on Katie's shoulder. She gave me a ride yesterday. Katie smiled at me. Did you really find Mom's special book? She was really upset about it. I did, I confirmed, smiling back at her. It was wedged between the seats in my car. Amber took the journal from me with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means to me. Actually, I think I do, I admitted. I'm sorry, Amber, but I read some of it. I was trying to find contact information to return it, but then I trailed off, embarrassed. Her expression hardened. You read my private journal? Not all of it, I said quickly. But enough to understand your situation. Enough to be worried about you and Katie. Katie looked between us, sensing tension. Mom, can we get ice cream? You said maybe after school today. Amber's attention returned to her daughter. Not today, sweetheart. We need to go. Amber, I interrupted urgently, lowering my voice. There was a man asking about you at Meridian magazine after your interview. Tall, dark hair, leather jacket. He seemed intense. Her face drained of color. Jake, she whispered. How did he know I was there? He might have followed you, I suggested. The journal mentioned you saw his car yesterday. Katie tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom? Is something wrong? Amber knelt down to Katie's level. Everything's fine, honey. But we need to go now. Remember our quick move plan? Katie nodded solemnly, her young face suddenly serious. The sight broke my heart. Let me help you, I offered impulsively. My car's right across the street. I can take you somewhere safe. Amber hesitated, clearly torn between her instinct to flee alone and the practical help I was offering. Please, I added. I've been worried about you both all day. Before she could answer, Katie pointed over my shoulder. Mom, isn't that Jake's car? We all turned to look. A black sedan had pulled up at the corner, and a man was getting out, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a determined expression. Even from a distance, I could feel the menace radiating from him. Get to my car. Now, I said, taking Katie's hand without thinking. For once, Amber didn't hesitate. We hurried across the street to my Subaru, Amber constantly looking over her shoulder. He's seen us, she said, her voice tight with fear as we piled into the car. Morgan, he's coming this way. I started the engine with shaking hands. Put your seatbelts on, I instructed, trying to keep my voice calm for Katie's sake. As Jake began jogging toward us, I pulled away from the curb and into traffic, my heart pounding against my ribs. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the street, watching us drive away. The look on his face made my blood run cold. Where to? I asked, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Just drive, Amber replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Anywhere but here. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I navigated through the afternoon traffic, checking the rearview mirror obsessively. There was no sign of Jake's black sedan, but the image of his face, cold and determined, was seared into my mind. Do you think he followed us? I asked, turning onto an arterial street that would take us downtown. Amber twisted in her seat, scanning the vehicles behind us. I don't see him, but Jake is persistent. He'll check the shelter first, then Katie's school again. In the back seat, Katie sat quietly, her small face solemn. She clutched her purple backpack against her chest like a shield. Are we running away again, Mom? She asked, her voice small but steady. The question held no complaint, just a child's need to understand what was happening. Amber reached back to squeeze her daughter's knee. Just until we figure things out, sweetheart. Morgan is helping us. Where are we going? I asked, merging onto the highway. Amber rubbed her temples, clearly trying to think through her limited options. I don't know. We can't go back to the shelter, that's the first place he'll look. We don't have enough saved for a motel yet. You could come to my place, I offered before I could second-guess myself. Just temporarily. Until you figure out your next steps. Amber looked at me with surprise. You barely know us. I know enough, I replied, thinking of the journal entries that had kept me up all night. I know you're a talented photographer trying to create a safe life for your daughter. I know you're in danger. That's enough for now. She studied my face, searching for ulterior motives. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Thank you. Just for tonight, until I can make other arrangements. I took the exit toward my apartment complex, relief washing over me. At least they would be safe for now. Do you have a pool? Katie asked suddenly, her voice brightening with the resilience only children possess. I couldn't help but smile. No pool, but there's a small park next door with a duck pond. I like ducks, she declared, sitting up straighter. I'm going to name them all. Amber's eyes met mine, a silent thank you for engaging with her daughter's attempt at normalcy. We arrived at my apartment complex and parked in my assigned spot. I led them up to my second-floor unit, suddenly self-conscious about the impersonal nature of my living space. It's not much, I apologized as I unlocked the door, and it's not very homey. It has walls and a roof, Amber said simply. That's more than enough. Katie wandered into the living room, examining the few art pieces I had displayed. These are pretty, she said, pointing to a series of abstract watercolors. A local artist named Serena Chen, I explained. She paints blindfolded to free her intuition, as she puts it. Amber smiled faintly. Sounds like something they'd teach in art school. I showed them around the small apartment. The kitchen, bathroom, my bedroom, and the office/spare room that would be theirs for the night. I can sleep on the couch, I offered. You two take the bedroom. Amber shook her head firmly. The office is perfect. We've been sharing a twin bed at the shelter for weeks. This pull-out sofa looks luxurious by comparison. I helped them settle in, finding clean towels and spare toothbrushes. Katie unpacked a few prized possessions from her backpack, a dog-eared chapter book, a small stuffed rabbit, and a sketchbook with colored pencils. I draw pictures like Mom takes pictures, she informed me seriously as she arranged her treasures on the coffee table. I'd love to see your drawings sometime, I told her. She considered this request carefully before nodding. Maybe tomorrow. If you're nice. Amber and I exchanged amused glances over Katie's head. Are you hungry? I asked, realizing it was approaching dinner time. I'm not much of a cook, but I can order delivery. Pizza. Katie suggested hopefully. Pizza it is, I agreed, grateful for the simple solution. While waiting for the delivery, Amber excused herself to make a phone call. I heard her in the hallway, speaking in low, urgent tones, presumably to the shelter, letting them know she and Katie were safe. Katie showed me her drawings, colorful depictions of animals, mostly, with a special focus on birds and dogs. Her talent was raw but evident, her eye for detail impressive for her age. These are wonderful, I told her honestly. You have your mother's artistic eye. She beamed at the comparison. Mom says I should draw what makes me happy. That's good advice, I agreed. When Amber returned, her expression was marginally more relaxed. The shelter director will hold our beds for 2 nights, as a special exception, she explained. And? She hesitated, a smile breaking through. Meridian magazine called. They offered me the job. Amber, that's fantastic. I exclaimed. I start on Monday, she continued, allowing herself a moment of genuine excitement. It's entry-level, but the salary is steady, and they offer health benefits after 3 months. We're getting a real house? Katie asked, looking up from her drawing. Amber sat beside her daughter. Not right away, sweetie. First, we need to save for a security deposit. But soon. I promise. The pizza arrived, and we ate in the living room, the atmosphere almost relaxed. Katie regaled us with stories about school, while Amber and I discussed the Seattle art scene. For a brief time, the danger felt distant. After dinner, Katie's eyelids began to droop, the day's excitement and stress catching up with her. Amber took her to get ready for bed, and I cleaned up the pizza boxes, giving them space for their bedtime routine. When Amber returned to the living room, her expression had turned serious again. "Morgan, I need to ask you something," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "How much did you read in my journal?" I sat across from her, choosing honesty. "Enough to understand what you've been through with Jake." I saw the photographs documenting the abuse, the entries about moving from shelter to shelter. "I know you've been collecting evidence." She nodded, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the couch fabric. "I never intended for anyone to see those entries. They were just for me, to remind myself I wasn't crazy when Jake would try to convince me I was overreacting or imagining things." "You were protecting yourself," I said. "Both legally and psychologically." "Yes." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I need to get a restraining order. The journal is my evidence. But I've been afraid to start the process because it requires giving my address. If Jake finds out where we're staying." "You can use my address," I offered immediately. "For the paperwork. Until you find your own place." Her eyes widened. "You would do that?" "You barely know me." "Sometimes you just know when something is the right thing to do," I said simply. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. We both froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Are you expecting someone?" Amber whispered, already rising to check on Katie. I shook my head, moving cautiously toward the door. "No one." Another knock, more insistent this time. I peered through the peephole and felt my blood turn to ice. Jake stood in the hallway, his face contorted with impatience. "I know you're in there, Amber," he called, loud enough to be heard through the door. "Your shelter friend told me everything. Just come out and talk to me." I turned to Amber, who had gone deathly pale. "It's him," I mouthed silently. She nodded, motioning for me to stay quiet. We both stood perfectly still, hoping he would give up and leave. Instead, the doorknob rattled as he tried to turn it. "Amber. Stop being ridiculous. I just want to talk." I gestured for Amber to take refuge in the bedroom with Katie. Once they were safely out of sight, I approached the door. "There's no Amber here," I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have the wrong apartment." A moment of silence followed, then, "You're the woman from the school. I saw you drive away with them." "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. "Please leave before I call security." "Just tell Amber I want to talk." His voice softened, taking on a pleading quality that was somehow more disturbing than his anger. "Tell her I miss her and Katie. Tell her I've changed." "I told you, there's no one here by that name," I insisted. "Now please leave." His response was to pound on the door so hard the hinges rattled. "You're lying. I know they're in there." Terrified he might actually break down the door, I retreated to the kitchen and called 911, keeping my voice as low as possible while still being heard by the dispatcher. I explained the situation: a threatening man at my door, a domestic violence survivor hiding inside, a child at risk. "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher assured me. "Try to keep everyone calm and away from the door." Jake continued his tirade in the hallway, alternating between threats and pleas. I could hear neighbors opening their doors to see what the commotion was about, then quickly closing them again. Amber emerged from the bedroom, her face set with determination. "I should talk to him. Get him to leave before he breaks in." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "The police are on their way. Going out there is exactly what he wants. But he's making a scene." "Your neighbors." "My neighbors will survive a little noise," I cut her off. "Your safety is what matters right now." A small voice came from the bedroom doorway. "Mom? Is that Jake?" Katie stood there in her pajamas, eyes wide with fear. Amber rushed to her daughter, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Yes, sweetie, but everything's going to be okay. Morgan called the police, and they're coming to help us." Jake must have heard Katie's voice because his pounding intensified. "Katie? Katie, it's me. Don't you want to come home, kiddo? Don't you miss your own room?" Katie buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trembling. The manipulation in Jake's voice, using a child's natural desire for stability against her, made my stomach turn. Just when it seemed Jake might actually break through the door, new voices joined the commotion in the hallway. The authoritative tone could only belong to police officers. "Sir, step away from the door. This doesn't concern you. My girlfriend and daughter are in there." "Sir, I won't ask again. Step away from the door and keep your hands where I can see them." The tension in the hallway was palpable even through the closed door. After what felt like an eternity, there was a knock, different from Jake's desperate pounding. "Seattle Police. Is everyone okay in there?" I opened the door to find two officers restraining Jake a few feet away. His face was contorted with rage, all pretense of concern gone. "You bitch," he spat, struggling against the officer's grip. "You turned her against me." One officer stayed with Jake while the other spoke to me. "Ma'am, is this man known to you?" "Not personally," I explained. "But he's been stalking my friend and her daughter. They're staying with me to escape him." The officer nodded. "Is your friend willing to make a statement?" I turned to Amber, who stood protectively in front of Katie. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "And I have evidence." She retrieved her journal from her bag and handed it to the officer. "It's all in here. The abuse, the stalking, everything. With dates and photographs." The officer took the journal with a nod of understanding. "This will help. We'll need formal statements from both of you." Jake was still shouting threats as they led him away, his words echoing down the hallway. Katie watched with wide eyes, clinging to her mother's side. When they were gone, the three of us stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Katie spoke, her voice small but clear. "Is he gone for good now, Mom?" Amber knelt beside her daughter. "The police will make sure he can't hurt us anymore. And tomorrow, we're going to court to make sure it stays that way." Katie nodded solemnly, then looked up at me. "Thank you for not letting him in." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "You're welcome, Katie. You're both very brave." We spent the rest of the evening in a strange limbo of relief and tension, waiting for the police to return with Amber's journal. When they finally did, they confirmed that Jake was being held on charges of violating an existing restraining order Amber had filed in Spokane before moving to Seattle. "The journal will be entered as evidence," the officer explained. "But we took photographs of all relevant pages, so you can keep the original." Amber clutched the journal to her chest, as if reuniting with an old friend. "Thank you." After the officers left, we all felt the adrenaline crash. Katie fell asleep almost immediately on the pull-out sofa, exhausted by the day's events. Amber and I sat in the kitchen, speaking in low voices over cups of tea. "I can't believe it's over," she whispered, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "After months of running and hiding." "It's not completely over," I reminded her gently. "There will be court appearances, paperwork." "But he's not out there anymore," she said, glancing toward the door. "For tonight, at least, we can breathe." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did it, Amber. You protected Katie, you got the job, you stood up to Jake. You did everything right." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I couldn't have done it without this." She touched the journal beside her. "And without you returning it. Finding us. Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be," I said. "Even if it's a rainy bus stop at the end of a long day." We shared a smile of understanding before Amber went to join Katie in sleep, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering sense that something profound had shifted in my life. 3 months after that rainy evening at the bus stop, I stood in the main exhibition hall of my gallery, surrounded by the buzz of Seattle's art community. The walls were adorned with photographs, street scenes, portraits, moments of urban life captured with extraordinary sensitivity. Each image told a story of resilience, hope, and the beauty found in ordinary moments. In the center of it all stood Amber, dressed in a simple black dress, her hair styled elegantly, looking nothing like the drenched woman I'd picked up that night. She moved confidently among the guests, explaining her artistic process, accepting compliments with grace. Occasionally, her eyes would find mine across the room, and we'd share a private smile, acknowledgement of the journey that had brought us here. The path from that night to this evening had not been easy or straight. After Jake's arrest, the legal process had been grueling. Amber had to testify about years of abuse, face Jake in court, and relive traumas she'd tried to bury. The journal, her faithful companion through the darkest times, became critical evidence that helped secure a 5-year restraining order and jail time for multiple violations of previous orders. Throughout it all, my apartment had remained their sanctuary. What had started as just for tonight extended to weeks, then months, as we navigated the aftermath together. Katie enrolled in the school near my apartment, thriving in the stability of a routine without fear. Amber excelled at her job with Meridian magazine, her natural talent quickly earning her additional responsibilities and recognition. Living together, we formed an unexpected family unit. I taught Amber about gallery operations and art marketing. She taught me about resilience and finding beauty in difficult circumstances. Katie taught us both about the power of adaptability and joy. When Amber received her first paycheck, she insisted on contributing to household expenses. When she received her first photography bonus, she started a savings account for her own place. I admired her fierce independence even as I grew accustomed to their presence filling my once empty apartment. The exhibition had been my idea, but Amber's talent made it a reality. I'd shown her portfolio to my gallery owner, who had been immediately impressed. Street photography through a woman's lens became our fall showcase, featuring not only Amber's recent work with professional equipment but also selected images from her journal, moments captured on a basic smartphone while living in shelters and running from abuse. Katie darted through the crowd now, proudly pointing out her mother's photographs to anyone who would listen. At 12, she had appointed herself Amber's unofficial publicist, her pride palpable. "Morgan," she called, spotting me near the entrance. "Someone just bought the Duck Pond series." "The whole thing?" I smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Katie. Your mom's work is really connecting with people." "It's because she sees things other people don't," Katie said with the simple wisdom of children. "Mom says you have to look for beauty even when life is hard. Especially when life is hard." I nodded, recognizing Amber's philosophy in her daughter's words. It was this perspective that made her photography so compelling, the ability to find light in darkness, dignity in struggle, hope in despair. The exhibition had another purpose beyond showcasing Amber's talent. A portion of each sale was going toward a program we'd created together, providing cameras and photography lessons to women in shelters. Amber had already started teaching weekend workshops, giving others the creative outlet that had sustained her through her darkest days. "There you are," Amber said, joining us by the entrance. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Can you believe this turnout?" "I can," I replied honestly. "Your work speaks to people, Amber. It always has." She squeezed my hand gratefully. "I have some news," she said, her eyes sparkling. "The loft apartment I looked at last week? They approved my application. Katie and I can move in at the end of the month." A complicated emotion rose in my chest, happiness for her milestone mixed with a selfish sadness at the thought of my apartment returning to its former emptiness. "That's amazing," I said, pushing aside my personal feelings. "The one with the north-facing windows for your studio space?" She nodded, excitement evident in her voice. "And Katie will have her own room. A real one, not a pull-out sofa or shelter bunk." Katie tugged at her mother's dress. But we'll still see Morgan all the time, right? She can come for dinner, and we'll visit her at the gallery, Anne. Of course, sweetheart, Amber assured her, looking at me with warmth. Morgan is family now. Family. The word resonated deeply. In just 3 months, these two had filled a void in my life I hadn't fully acknowledged existed. My post-divorce existence had been comfortable but hollow, focused on work, devoid of deep connections. Amber and Katie had brought chaos, yes, but also laughter, purpose, and a kind of love I hadn't expected to find. The exhibition continued around us, a testament to how art could transform pain into beauty. Near the gallery entrance, in a special display case, sat Amber's journal, open to a page with a photograph of a rainy bus stop and an entry dated the day we met. Beside it, a placard read, "The beginning of the journey. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, the three of us stood together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by Amber's vision made manifest. "I can't believe this is my life now," Amber said softly, gazing around at her photographs. "A year ago, I was hiding in a shelter, terrified and hopeless." "You were never hopeless," I corrected gently. "Your journal proves that. Even in your darkest entries, there was always a determination to create a better life for Katie. For yourself." She nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. "But I might never have found my way here without you, Morgan. Without that rainy night and your decision to stop." "I'm just glad I did," I replied simply. Katie, who had been examining one of the photographs, rejoined us with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, remember when you told me that home isn't a place, it's wherever we're together and safe?" "I remember," Amber said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I think our home got bigger," Katie declared. "It has Morgan in it now, even when we moved to our new apartment." Amber's eyes met mine over Katie's head, and I saw in them all the words that didn't need saying: gratitude, affection, and the recognition of a bond that had formed through extraordinary circumstances. Later that night, after we'd returned to the apartment and Katie had gone to bed, Amber and I sat on the balcony, watching the lights of Seattle shimmer across the bay. "I've been thinking about what Katie said," Amber began, her voice soft in the night air. "About home expanding to include you." "She's a wise kid," I replied. "She is." Amber paused, choosing her words carefully. "The thing is, Morgan, these past months have taught me that rebuilding doesn't just mean finding an apartment and a job. It means creating a life with people who truly see you. Who value you." "I see you, Amber," I said simply. "I always have. From that first night." She reached over and took my hand. "I know. And that's why, even though Katie and I are moving into our own place, I don't want to lose what we've built here. This connection." "You won't," I promised. "Family, remember?" She smiled, the moonlight catching in her eyes. Family. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on how a simple act, offering a ride to a stranger in the rain, had set in motion a transformation none of us could have predicted. The journal Amber had left behind that night had been more than just a collection of entries and photographs. It had been the key that unlocked new possibilities for all of us. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest choices. A woman standing in the rain. A car slowing to a stop. A journal forgotten between seats. And in those moments, lives can change forever. If you've ever had a chance encounter that changed your life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the universe puts the right people in our path exactly when we need them most. Have you experienced that kind of serendipity? This story shows how Amber's quest for family revenge against her abuser transformed into something more healing. Drop a like if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life journeys of family revenge and redemption, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that even the darkest storms eventually clear. Thank you for listening to my story of how family revenge can evolve into protection and healing. Remember, kindness towards strangers can create ripples that transform lives in ways we never imagined. The cycle of family revenge ends when we choose to help each other. Until next time, keep your hearts open to unexpected connections.